Some cities hide secrets darker than the night itself. Certain traditions should not be questioned. In Milford, the silent parade advances every year under a moonless sky, and if you speak, you will regret it. This is the story of a man who broke his silence and paid the ultimate price. The air in Milford was strange tonight, heavy with a silence that clung to the skin like a damp cloth. Ben Harper felt it as soon as he got off the bus, his boots crunching on the gravel of the only bus stop in town. It was the end of October, a cool, cold night that should have vibrated with the rustling of leaves or the distant howls of coyotes. But Milford was calm, too calm. Not a cricket, not a breath of wind in the bare trees of the main street, and the few street lights flickered faintly, casting long, restless shadows that seemed to move when they weren't looking at them. Ben adjusted his backpack, his breath forming a cloud in the icy air, and headed for the boarding house where he had rented a room. He was just a vagabond looking for odd jobs, but something about this place was not in his stomach, as if he had entered a room where everyone had killed themselves. When he arrived, Milford was a tiny dot nestled in a forgotten corner of the Midwest, the kind of place you miss if you blink past faded shop windows, a dinner with a neon sign buzzing like a dying insect, and houses with peeling paint that seemed to sink into the earth. Ben had seen cities like this, dying, desperate, but Milford was different. It wasn't just neglecting, it was observing. The windows of the shop stared like eyes, and the silence hung over him, thick and unnatural, as if the city was holding its breath. He'd heard about the silent parade before he'd even arrived. A gas station attendant 50 kilometers away, a skinny old man with a cigarette hanging from his lips, had mentioned it as he cashed in his coffee. "Are you going to Milford?" had he asked with narrowed eyes. "Do not touch their parade. He doesn't like strangers snooping around." When Ben had insisted on more, the man had shook his head, muttering something about keeping quiet and not tempting fate. Ben Avery, thinking of some small-town oddity, like a corn festival or some strange local custom, but now, walking down Main Street, enveloped in this oppressive silence. The old man's warning seemed less a joke than a prophecy. The boarding house was a two-story building on the edge of town, its porch creaking under the weight of Ben, the landlady. Madame Cave was a gaunt woman, her gray hair pulled in a tight bun, her piercing and fixed eyes like those of a bird. She handed him a key to a room on the second floor, her voice cold and sharp. "No noise after dark," she said, her gaze piercing him. "And stay away from the parade tomorrow night. It's not for strangers." Ben nodded, not wanting to argue, but his words stayed in him, heavy and sharp like a blade hidden in a handshake. His room was small, smelling of dust and old wood, with a bumpy bed and a single window overlooking the street. He put down his backpack and sat on the edge of the mattress, the springs creaking beneath him. Outside, the city was still, the streetlights casting a sickly yellowish glow on the sidewalks of the air. Not a car, not a dog, not a voice from the neighboring houses. It was like 6,000 Fords had fallen asleep or pretended to. Ben pulled out his phone to check the time, but the screen flickered and shut off. The battery drained despite a full charge. 1 hour earlier. He frowned, shaking it, but the screen remained black, as if the city itself was sucking the life out of the next day. Milford looked no less strange. Dinner was open, but the few customers ate in silence, their eyes fixed on their plates, avoiding his gaze. The waitress, a young woman with pale skin and nervous hands, took her order without a word, her gestures quick, as if afraid of lingering. When Ben tried to make conversation, asking for details about the parade, her face tightened and she whispered, "Don't go, it's not for you." The other customers froze their forks halfway from their mouths, their gaze brushing them a fraction of a second before returning to their food. The air in the dining room grew colder, the silence heavier. Ebony felt a shiver in the back of his neck, as if he had stepped on a grave in the evening. His curiosity burned stronger than his discomfort. The silent parade was the only thing everyone was talking about, or rather no one was talking about. Every question he asked was met with tight lips or sharp eyes. And the more he was told to stay away, the more he wanted to know why. What was so special about seeing people march in silence? Was this a religious ceremony, a memorial, some weird ritual? Ben wasn't the type to get scared easily. He'd hitchhiked halfway across the country, slept in alleys, fought drunks with knives. But something in Milford's silence gnawed at him like a splinter under his skin. He decided to watch the parade just from afar to understand the commotion. He promised himself to keep quiet, to stay hidden, and to leave town the next morning with a story to tell. As night fell, the city became even quieter. If possible, the street lamps dimmed their glow, barely touching the pavement, and the air became brisk, carrying a faint sour smell, like damp earth and decay. Bane went out of the boarding house, ignoring Madame Cav's warning glance from the porch, and found a hiding place at the edge of the main street. Half hidden behind a stiletto box, the street was empty, the shops dark, their windows reflecting only the faint glimmer of lights. He checked his watch at 8:55 p.m. and waited for his short breath, his heart beating a little too fast. At exactly 9 o'clock, the silence deepened, a suffocating weight weighing on his chest, and then he heard a faint rustle, like footsteps on dry leaves coming from the end of the street. The parade began. A slow, deliberate march of villagers advancing in perfect harmony. Men, women, children, all dressed in dark and simple clothes, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes fixed straight ahead. They walked noiselessly, their feet barely touching the ground, their movements strangely fluid like puppets pulled by invisible strings. No one spoke, no one coughed, no one breathed too hard. It was as if the whole city had become one organism. Moving as one, silent as death. Ben watched his skin tremble, his mouth dry. There were dozens, maybe 100, stretching along the street in a long unbroken line. Their faces were false, too pale, too motionless, like masks carved out of wax. They couldn't see their eyes clearly, but something in them was knotting his stomach, as if they weren't looking at the world, but through it into something else. The parade passed in front of him, their steps perfectly synchronized, the silence so absolute that it seemed like a scream stuck in his throat. He wanted to run to the boarding house and lock the door, but his feet seemed rooted, his curiosity chaining him in place. That's when he did it. He hadn't planned it, hadn't even thought about it. The silence was too much, too unnatural, weighing on him like a weight he could not bear. He leaned slightly and whispered, "What is it?" The world stopped. Every face in the parade turned to him at once. Dozens of pale, envious masks swiveling in his direction with mechanical precision. Their eyes, my God, their eyes glowed faintly sickly white, like moonlight trapped in frost. Ben's heart froze, his breath caught in his chest. He stumbled backward, the mailbox sinking into his back, but the walkers did not approach. He stared at him, their eyes bright, piercing him without blinking, implacable, as if he could see every thought in his head, every fear in his soul. The silence grew heavier, thicker, a living thing that enveloped him, pressing the air from his lungs. He tried to speak again, to apologize for saying anything, but his voice died in his throat, the words turning to ashes. The walkers did not blink, did not breathe, just looked at their bright, burning eyes. Then, with a single movement, they turned away, walking again, silent but heavier, as if the earth were shaking under their weight. Ben's legs were shaking, his body screaming to run, but he couldn't move, couldn't look away. The procession went on, disappearing at the corner of the street, but the air did not lighten. The silence did not break. He was alone again, or so he thought. A sound came from behind him, a faint scraping, like footsteps dragging on gravel. He turned, his heart pounding, but the street was empty, the shadows still, the air colder, sharp enough to sting his skin, and the sour smell stronger, like something rotting out of sight. He pulled his boots back, scraping the pavement, his eyes scanning every corner, every alley. The city seemed alive, watching, waiting for his silence. A trap already set. He went back to the boarding house, his hands trembling as he searched for the key. Madame Carver was nowhere to be seen, the house dark and silent, the air inside thick with that same sour smell. He locked his door, checked it twice and sat up on the bed, his breath hitched, the mind boiling that were his eyes. Why had he turned that way? He thought it was a light show, a small-town ritual he had misunderstood, but the memory of his bright eyes burned in his mind, sharp and cold, like a blade pressed to his throat. Sleep did not come. The room was too still, the silence too heavy, broken only by irregular sounds. A creak in the hallway, a tap at the window, a low hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Ben clenched his knees, his eyes fixed on the door, waiting for something to happen, fearing it might. The night stretched on, endless and cruel, each minute heavier than the last. He didn't dare turn on the light, didn't dare make any noise. The silence was no longer just outside, it was within him. A weight crushing his chest, a presence watching from the shadows. By dawn, the city seemed normal again, or as normal as Milford could be. The streetlights were out, dinner was open, the premises vacant to their occupations, with the same silent and cautious movements. But Ben noticed the quick, sharp glances of the grocer's waitress, the old man sweeping the sidewalk. He knew he had been to the parade. He knew he had spoken. He saw it in their eyes, no longer bright, but dark and complicit, as if he was sharing a secret he wasn't supposed to understand. He packed his bag, ready to go, but the bus didn't arrive until evening, and the day seemed like a trap. Everywhere he went, silence followed him, thicker, mixed with the sour smell that clung to his clothes. He avoided the main street, staying in the alleys, but the city seemed to move around him, the streets closing in senseless ways, still bringing him back to the center of Milford. The dinner, the shops, the board, they were always there, at a turning point, as if the city was guarding him and bringing him closer. After 1200, he couldn't take it anymore. He went to dinner, hoping for answers, and found the old man of the day before, his face wrinkled and tired, his eyes heavy with a kind of pity. "You talked, didn't you?" he said, his low voice barely audible over the clatter of the plates. Ben froze his coffee cup halfway from his mouth. "Did you feel him out there?" "Silence is not just a parade. It is a promise." "What do you mean?" Ben asked, his voice trembling, though he already dreaded the answer. The old man leaned forward, his black going, his eyes scanning the door as if he expected that something between Milford and older than it looks in the 1800s. Something happened here, something terrible. The villagers made a pact to keep it buried. To keep them silent, the silent parade and pray to them. Every year we march, we remain silent, and they let us leave. But if you speak, he interrupted, his eyes, crossing those of Ben, dark and heavy, they hear you and they do not let go. Ben's mouth went dry, his heart pounding. "Who are they?" he whispered, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The old man didn't answer, just shook his head and turned away, his shaking hands clutching his cup. Dinner fell silent again, the other diners staring at their plates, their faces pale, their eyes avoiding his parties, their legs shaking, the air outside colder, the sour smell stronger, as if it came from him. He wanted to run, hitchhike, do anything to get out of Milford. But the city seemed like a cage, its streets closing in on her silence, a chain around her chest. Night fell too fast, the sky turning purple, the streetlights dimming. Ben remained in his room, the door locked, the curtains drawn, but the silence was louder, a roar in his ears, a weight that hurt his bones. He could feel it. The city was watching, waiting for the thick air of anticipation. Then at 9 p.m., the rustling began again, that light scraping of footsteps in the street. Below, the silent parade had resumed. He didn't want to look, didn't want to know, but something pulled him toward the window, his trembling hands pushing aside the curtains. The walkers were there, marching down the main street in strange harmony, their faces pale, their eyes glowing faintly like embers in a dying fire. But this time they did not pass. They all stopped and turned to the boarding house, their bright eyes fixed on its window, unblinking. Ben's breath stopped, his heart pounding against his ribs. He pulled back the curtains, falling back, but he could still feel the gaze burning through the walls, through his skin, into his soul. The footsteps grew louder, closer, more in the street. But on the porch, in the corridor outside his door, the silence disappeared, replaced by a shambas, a voiceless hum, a wordless whisper, a sound that vibrated in his chest, his bones, his teeth. He leaned back against the wall, his hands searching for something, anything to defend himself. But there was nothing but the bumpy bed, the chipped nightstand, the empty chair that seemed to be watching him with silent malice, the door creaking slowly and deliberately, the lock turning of its own accord. Ben's scream died in his throat, his voice stolen, replaced by cold, hollow pain. The door opened, revealing the walkers, their pale faces filling the frame, their eyes glowing like lanterns in the dark. He didn't speak, didn't move, just looked at their presence, a weight he crushed pulling him toward them. He tried to fight, to push back, but his body no longer obeyed him. Her legs moved of their own accord toward the door to the passage, and they wrapped their cold hands around her, brushing against her arms. His face touched them like burning ice. He wanted to scream, to beg, but his voice was gone, swallowed up by the silence, by the song that filled his mind, his soul. They led him out into the street where the parade awaited their eyes, a sea of light in the darkness. He was part of it now, his feet moving with theirs, his body no longer his own. Silence was a living thing in him, linking him to the walk, to this city, to the curse that held them all at night, stretched endlessly, the parade crossing streets that turned and closed endlessly, without change. Ben's mind screamed, but his body walked silent and obedient, his eyes shining faintly like the others. He could feel them now, the spirits that bound the city, old and hungry, their whispering, a chain that held him tight. He was theirs and they were his forever. A year has passed, or it could be 100. Time was meaningless in Milford. The bus entered the city again, its headlights piercing the October darkness. His only passenger descending into the gravel parking lot with a backpack over his shoulder. The air was heavy, the silence thick, the streetlights flickering faintly. The newcomer, a young woman with curious eyes, walked down the main street, feeling the gaze of the city on her, its secrets hidden in the shadows. Tomorrow night the silent parade would march again, silent and implacable, under a moonless sky. The villagers would warn her, their voices low, their eyes dark with fear. Stays away would say, he does not speak, but curiosity is powerful, stronger than warnings, stronger than fear. And when the parade begins, when silence envelops her like a shroud, will she remain silent or will she whisper just once and feel the weight of no bright eyes? Some traditions are traps waiting for the curious to stumble. Some silences are louder than described. And some nights, when the air is still and the streets are dark, you will hear the rustle of the silent parade, calling you to join. Will you remain silent or will you speak? Story number 2, The Bell That Never Stops. Some are more than noise, they are a summons, a warning, a curse. In Hollowbrook, a church bell rings every night at 3:00 a.m., resounding from a long-abandoned place. If you hear it, don't listen too long. This is the story of 4 teenagers who searched for answers in the dark and found something that never lets up. The bell rang at 3:00 in the morning, clear and sharp, piercing the still air of Hollowbrook like a blade. His noise was not only loud, it was heavy, a deep resonant clingy that vibrated in bones, teeth, soul. Ethan Carter froze in bed, the blankets pulled up to his chin, his heart pounding, as the echo lingered, fading into the night. Hollowbrook was a small town where everyone knew each other, where secrets were hard to keep. But the bell was different. It rang every night, always at 3 a.m. From the old church on the hill, a ruined relic that no one had touched for 50 years. Ethan, 17, is restless, had heard it all his life, but tonight it seemed closer, heavier, as if she called him. Hollowbrook was nothing extraordinary, a group of worn-out houses, a dinner with greasy coffee, and the frozen main street. In the years 1975, the Church of St. Agnes enthroned on the edge of the city, its bell tower jagged against the sky like a wall. Its windows were barricaded, its walls stained with moss and time, and its bell tower dominated the silent city, except at this unholy hour. Ethan's grandmother said the bell was cursed, that it rang for the dead, for the souls trapped in the church after a fire in the 1970s that killed half the congregation. Don't go, she warned, her voice sharp, her eyes distant. This bell does not ring for the living. Ethan rolled his eyes, chalking it up to old ladies' superstitions. But now, in the darkness, the bell echoing in his chest, He wasn't so sure. He wasn't the only one who didn't sleep because of her at school. The next day, his friends were talking about the bell, their voices low, their eyes peering as if they feared being overheard. Mia, bald and tongue-in-cheek. He leaned over the cafeteria table, his dark hair falling over his face. "Someone must be joking," she said, sticking her fork into a pile of fries. "Can't a bell ring on its own for 50 years? We should check it out tonight." Lucas, the discreet one, pulled up his glasses and shook his head, his face pale. "You know what they say? Those who go in don't come out unscathed," but Mia just smiled. Her sparkling eyes daring as Ethan secretly admired Sarah, the voice of reason in the group, chewed her lip, twisting a lock of blonde hair. "What if it's true?" she murmured. "What if they were ghosts or something ethereal, trying to look braver than they were? Ghosts don't ring bells." "Sarah, it's probably some shady guy playing a trick on us. I'm on it." He didn't really believe in the ghost, but the sound of the bell had left a weight in his chest. Lucas smiled, groaned, and Sarah sighed, but they all agreed. Tonight they would break into St. Agnes to find out who or what was ringing that bell. The day stretched the air in Hollowbrook, growing heavier as the sun went down, painting the sky shades of wounded purple. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the four were gathered at the edge of the city, flashlight in hand. Their breaths forming clouds in the cool October air, the church stood before him dark and jagged against a starless sky. The boards on the windows were cracked, some hanging, and the main doors, once grand, were warped and cracked, their panes peeling like dead skin. The bell tower loomed above, its steeple tilted, the bell itself hidden in shadow. Ethan's stomach tightened with concern, tightening as they approached. The air smelled bad, sour like damp earth and decay, with a faint metallic note that burned his nose. Mia led the way, her flashlight beam piercing the darkness. "It's not daring, despite the oppressive silence around them. Come on, babies," she murmured, her voice sharp but low, as if afraid to break the silence. Lucas clutched his lamp like a buoy, his eyes wide behind his glasses. As Sarah stayed close to Ethan, her shoulder brushing against his, her breath quick and short, the church seemed to be watching them, its windows like eyes, its walls breathing with a faint rhythmic crackle that wasn't quite rising. The main doors were unlocked, which was the first thing that seemed wrong. Ethan expected a padlock, a chain, something to keep people out, but the doors swung open with a low groan, the sound echoing in the darkness. Inside, the air was colder in there, thick with dust and that sour smell of decay that clung to their clothes. Their lamps swept the nave, revealing broken benches, cobwebs hanging like curtains, and a broken altar. At the other end, his cross bent and blackened as if burned. The stained glass windows, miraculously intact, glowed faintly in the dark, their color muted but vivid, red, blue, gold, depicting hollow-eyed breasts and outstretched hands. "This place is a ruin," Mia muttered, but her voice trembled, betraying her confidence. She pushed her sneakers forward, squeaking on glass and debris, and the others followed, their beams trembling in their hands. The silence was heavier inside, a living thing pressing against their ears, their chest making every breath stolen. Ethan's heart was pounding, not just with fear, but with a deeper feeling, as if the church itself was pulling at him, playing with his pulse. They found the stairs to the bell tower behind the altar, a narrow spiral of warped wood and rusty iron. "Let's lead in the dark." Mia passed her beam first, bouncing off the walls, revealing scratches and stains that seemed too intentional, like claw marks or words in a language neither of them knew. Lucas hesitated, his voice barely a whisper. "We shouldn't be here, it sounds bad." But Mia glanced at him, and Ethan pushed him forward, his own unease drowned in the need to know. Sarah took Ethan's hand, his fingers cold and trembling, and they went up the markets, creaking under their weight, the air growing colder, thicker. At every step, the bell tower was a small circular room, its walls blackened with soot, the floor littered with broken boards and dust. The bell hung above, massive and ancient, its surface pricked and dark as long slightly. Although there was no wind, the beam of Ethan's lamp lit him and his breath stopped. The bell wasn't just old, it was bad. Its edges seemed to sparkle like heat, rising from the asphalt, and the air around it pulsed, heavy and alive like a heartbeat. The sour smell was stronger here, mixed with something pungent, like ozone or blood, and Ethan's skin shivered, his heart racing in a way that wasn't just fear. "It's almost 3 o'clock, Mia whispered, checking his phone, but the screen flickered and went out, just like Ethan's the night before. Lucas's flashlight also flickered, the beam dimming and then widening, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move. Only Sarah squeezed Ethan's arm. His voice has a trembling whisper, "We should leave now." But before anyone could move, the bell rang. The sound was deafening, a deep shaking clang that shook the tower, the ground, their bodies. Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs, not just from the noise, but from a sharp burning pain, as if something was squeezing his chest, tugging at his life. Mia Alta grabbing his head, his lamp falling to the ground, Lucas tripping over his glasses, sliding his bone-pale face. Sarah cried out, a short muffled sound, as the bell rang louder again, heavier, the air vibrating with its power. "There's no one here," Mia cried, her voice breaking. Her eyes widened as she spun around, looking for a ringer, a string, anything, but the bell too, only slow and deliberate, its movement unnatural, as if pulled by invisible hands. Every sound was a hammer in their chest, their hearts beating painfully, their breathing short and jerky. Ethan's vision blurred, dancing in his eyes, and he felt a deep, cold pull, as if the bell were pulling something from him, something vital. Lucas shouted, his voice high and panicked. But the third sound came and he fell to his knees, clutching his chest, his face twisted in pain. Sarah was crying now, her hands over her ears, her body trembling as she backed up the stairs. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her, but the bell rang again and his legs flexed, the pain in his chest strong enough to steal his breath. Mia was still standing, her fists clenched, her face defiant. But even she was pale, her eyes wide with emotion that wasn't just fear, it was understanding. They stumbled down the stairs at the sound of the bell, chasing them, each louder, heavier, like a dot crashing down on their souls. The church seemed to change, the walls shrinking, the shadows stretching and twisting, forming shapes, hands, faces, eyes that glittered at the periphery of their vision. Ethan's lamp went out, plunging them into darkness. But the stained glass windows were brighter now, their colors pulsing the faces of the breasts, changing their open mouths into silent cries. At the bottom of the stairs they reached the nave, but the doors were closed, sealed, though they had left them open. Ethan tapped on his sore points, his heart pounding with every ring of the bell. Mia kicked the wood, her voice hoarse from screaming, but the doors did not move, the church holding them like a trap. Lucas was on the floor now, panting, his hands clawing at his chest. Her eyes wide and blind, Sarah was beside him, her sobs stifled, her body trembling as the bell rang, still lessen. A physical force pressing on them, stealing their strength. "Stop it," Mia cried, her voice breaking. But the bell did not listen. It rang again, and Lucas stopped, his limp body, his eyes open but empty, staring into nothingness. Sarah's screams turned into moans, her hands reaching for Ethan. But the next sound struck and she collapsed, her body crumbling like a rag doll, his breath gone, Ethan's heart a drum, each beat painful, his vision narrowing into a tunnel as the bell still rang. Relentless, unwavering, Mia grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin, her pale, fierce face hissed as she pulled him toward the altar, to a side door he hadn't noticed. But the bell rang, and Ethan set his legs, his body hitting the ground, the pain in his chest, a fire burning in his veins. Mia was still standing, dragging him, her strength waning, her breath coming in short. The church was alive now, the walls pulsing, the shadows moving, stretching, their cold, sharp hands brushing against his skin. The last sound came and Mia dropped her body motionless, her eyes wide and bright like breasts in stained glass. Ethan tried to scream, but his voice was gone, his throat raw, his body heavy as stone. The shadows came closer, their touch like ice, their whispers filling his mind. Not words, but a hum, a song, a summons that tugged at his soul. The bell rang one last time, and everything went black. Morning came to Hollowbrook, the sun rising slowly and pale, casting long shadows over the town. The church was silent as always. Its bell motionless, its windows dark, the villagers going about their business, their faces tense, their eyes avoiding the hill on which Agnes sat. No one was talking about the 4 missing teenagers. Although everyone knew it, no one approached the church, although the bell would ring again at 3 o'clock in the morning, as always, calling the lost, the curious, the damned. In dinner, the old man who had warned Ethan's grandmother years earlier was sipping his coffee. His hands are closed, but his eyes are heavy. They went, didn't they? He whispered to the waitress, who nodded, face pale, hands shaking, as she poured another cup. The bell always takes what it wants, he said, his voice low, like a prayer for forgiveness. That night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the bell rang again, echoing through Hollowbrook, shaking windows, shaking bones. The villagers remained in their beds, their doors locked, their prayers silent. But on the hill, in the stained glass windows of the church, new faces appeared, 4 of them, eyes wide, mouths open in silent cries, their glow faint but undeniable. Ethan, Mia, Lucas, Sarah, trapped forever in the glass, their souls bound to the bell, to the church, to the curse that never stopped. Some are more than noise, they are a claim, a chain, a cage. In Hollowbrook, the bell rings every night, calling those who listen too closely. If you hear it, do not look, do not go up the hill, do not open the door, for some nights, when the air is still and the bell begins to ring, it is not just a sound, it is a summons. You will answer. Story number 3, The Dark City. Some places hide their darkness in plain sight, where the sun shines but leaves no trace. In Grefeld, the shadows do not fall, but they observe. This is the story of a man who saw what shouldn't have been seen and learned why some cities never let you go. The sun was high above Grefeld, a bright and relentless disk in a cloudless sky. But something was wrong. Jack Ellis noticed him as soon as he stepped out of the Greyhound, his boots blowing dust from the cracked sidewalk of the bus stop. The light was too bright, too sharp, painting the world in stark white and grey, but nothing cast a shadow, not the rusted panel, not the warped benches, not even Jack himself. He looked down at his feet, expecting to see the familiar dark outline, but the ground was bare, as if the sun refused to recognize it. His skin shivered, a cold worry knotting in his belly. Grefeld was not just calm, she was false, like a photograph whose colors had been drained, a place where the world held its breath. Grefeld was an insignificant town, a point in the heart of the Midwest where the fields stretched out and the roads seemed to lock themselves in. Jack, a photographer hunting stories for his blog, had heard about it at a dinner party 2 states away from a trucker. Strange place, the man had said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the door. No shadow, no one talks about it. If you go, keep moving. Jacques Avery thinking of a small town legend, an oddity to photograph for a few clicks, but now, standing in the empty street, under the overwhelming sun. The absence of his shadow seemed the warning that he had been too stubborn to listen. The town was small, a handful of worn-out buildings clustered around a single intersection, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a gas station with pumps so old it looked like relics, and a row of houses with peeling paint and veiled windows. The air was heavy, smelling of dry earth and something more pungent, like burnt metal or old blood. Jack adjusted his camera strap, his fingers brushing the worn leather, and began to walk. The locals moved slowly, their faces pale, their eyes downcast, avoiding the sun as if it hurt them. A woman in a faded dress passed by. It is not silent, her body without shadow. A man leaned against a street lamp, his cigarette smoke rising, but the ground beneath him was empty, without the dark figure that should have been there. Jack's heart beating faster than his dry mouth. He wanted to ask, to demand answers, but their flat eyes were suspicious. Almost empty, kept him silent. He checked into the only motel a stocky building, with a sign saying Greffield Dress in curdled red letters. The receptionist, a thin man with skin like parchment and eyes that didn't blink enough, handed him a key without a word. "No photo after dark," he said, his voice low and hoarse as if he had swallowed gravel. Jack nodded, throat tight, but the receptionist's gaze lingered, heavy and complicit, as if he could see the questions burning in Jack's mind. The room was small, the air stale, the bed sagged under a blanket. Smelling dust and weather, Jack set his camera down on the nightstand, its lens glinting in the harsh sunlight. Entering through the window, he tried to drive away the discomfort, telling himself that it was a play of light, a geographical peculiarity of the city, but the memory of the shadowless street clung to him as cold and heavy as a hand on his shoulder. The day passed slowly, the sun refusing to soften its light, pouring down on Greffield like a spotlight on an empty stage. Jack will go into town, his heavy camera around his neck, taking pictures of the gas station dinner, houses that seemed to lean inward, watching the locals avoid him, crossing the street as he approached, their faces averted, their steps quick and silent. He tried to talk to a few, an old man sweeping the sidewalk, a woman tending a sparse garden, but they ignored her dry voices, their eyes scanning the ground where their shadows should have been. "Don't ask," whispered the old man, his broom scraping the sidewalk. "Let it go." The woman said nothing, just stared at him, her eyes dark and hollow, like bottomless wells. After 12 and 2, Jack's curiosity was a burning fire, stronger than his fear. He couldn't leave without an answer, without proof. He found a spot near the diner where a group of locals sat on benches, their faces blank, their bodies without shadows. Under the relentless sun, he raised his camera, framing a picture of a young woman in a blue dress, her hair tied up, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't notice, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his expression blank. Jack pulled the trigger, the loud click in the silent air, and checked the screen, his breath caught, his heart stuttering. In the photo, the woman was sharp, her bright blue dress against the gray sidewalk, but behind her, where her shadow should have been, was something else, a dark and twisted shape, human but distorting its jagged edges, its shape pulsing like a heartbeat. She had a face or something like it, with bright white eyes and a mouth stretched into a smile full of sharp, shiny teeth. The shadow was not attached to her. She was alive, standing right behind her, her claw hands hovering over her shoulders, her smile hungry, predatory. Jax's hands were shaking, the camera almost slipping from his fingers. He looked up expecting to see her, but the woman was alone, her body without shadow, her face still blank, unconscious. He backed away, his heart beating, his breath short. The air seemed heavier, the metallic and sour smell stronger, sticking to his skin. He wanted to show someone, demand answers. But the locals were watching him now, their eyes narrowed, their faces tense with something like anger or fear. He hurried to the motel, locking the door behind him, his mind boiling. The picture was real, undeniable, but what was this, a play of light, a problem with the camera, or something worse? Something. Here he checked the image again, zooming in, and the shadow's smile seemed wider, his eyes brighter. The sun went down slowly, the sky turning a wounded purple, the light fading but never softening. Jacques remained in his room, the curtains drawn, the door locked, but the silence was worse, thick and oppressive, broken only by irregular sounds, a scraping outside, a cracking in the corridor, a drooling hum from the walls. He tried to upload the photo to his blog, but his phone went black despite a full charge. The camera also flickered the image of the flashing shadow. The smile widened with each glance, his skin bristling, his heart racing against the air in the room, becoming colder, heavier, as if pressing against it. At midnight the sounds began, a soft scraping like footsteps dragging on the sidewalk, coming from the street outside. Jack parted the curtains just a little and looked. The city was dark, the streetlights dim, their glow barely touching the ground. But the streets were not empty. Forms moved in the shadows, not people, not animals, but dark and fluid things sliding between buildings, their shapes twisting and changing like smoke. They were detached shadows of their hosts, their edges jagged, their eyes bright white, their mouths grinning with its sharp, hungry teeth. They moved with intent, chasing their forms, stretching and curling, sliding over walls, under doors, through cracks in the pavement. Geek's breath stopped. His heart pounding against his ribs, he let the curtain fall back, but let them follow, closer, scraping against the walls of the motel, tapping on the window, whispering his name in an inhuman way. Jacques. Jacques. It was low, guttural, a heart of voices superimposed, each to grip and hungry, as if inside biting his mind. He grabbed his device, clutching it like a talisman. But the screen wavered, the shadow's face, filling it, his smile wide, his eyes fixed on it. He let go of it, the clatter resounding in the silent room, and rushed to the door, checking the lock, his hands trembling so hard that he could barely grasp the handle. The shadows were inside now, or so he felt. The air was too heavy, too cold, the room too dark, the pulsing corners of shape that weren't there when they looked directly. Then he felt a tug at his feet, subtle but real, as if something were tugging at his shadow, or what should have been his shadow. He looked down, his heart stopping. The ground was empty, but he could feel it. A cold, sharp tug, as if his shadow were trying to break free. To break free, his legs were shaking, his breath coming in a panicked blow, the air thick with that sour metallic smell, now mixed with something worse. Decay, the smell of something long dead. He grabbed his backpack, desperate to leave, but the door didn't move. The lock jammed, the handle cold as ice. The scraping was louder, not just outside but inside, under the bed, in the walls behind him. He turned, his lamp beam trembling in his hand, but the light didn't help. She passed through the shadows, their shapes intact, their smiles wider, their eyes brighter. They were everywhere, sliding across the ceiling, gathering in the corners, their whisper, a roar. Now gek, each syllable, a claw in his mind. He stumbled to the window, ripping off the curtains, but the glass was black, reflecting not the street but them. Dozens of shadows, their faces pressed against the pane, their teeth gleaming, their eyes bright like dying stars. He cried out the sound, raw and desperate, but it was swallowed up by the whispers, by the tugging at his feet. Harder, pulling harder, as if his shadow were breaking away. He fell to his knees, his hands clawing at the ground, trying to hold on. But the pain was sharp, burning, as if something were tearing her soul apart. The shadows came closer, their shapes enveloping him, their touch cold and sharp like knives made of darkness. He felt his shadow where it was escape, a cold, hollow pain spreading through his body, his heart slowing, his breathing short. The whispers were in him now, feeling his mind, his bones, his blood, singing his name. As the shadows pulled him into the darkness within himself, he awoke in silence, or what seemed to Griffield. The sun was up, its harsh, relentless light pouring out the window like a flood. Jack was on the floor, his camera beside him, its screen cracked. The shadow's face disappeared. His body seemed false, light, empty. As if a part of him was missing. He stood up, his legs weak, his heart pounding, and looked down. No shadow. The floor was bare, the light streaming through it as if it weren't there. His breath caught, his hands trembling, touching his chest, his face expecting to feel something different, but he was still himself, or he was. He grabbed his backpack and ran to the door of the motel, now easily opening the golden street, quiet but alive of vacant premises to their occupations. They did not look at him, did not speak, but their faces were different, calm, almost welcoming, their eyes meeting hers with a knowing gleam. The woman at dinner, the old man on the sidewalk, the motel clerk. He nodded slightly, but deliberately, as if he recognized him, as if he belonged to them. Gex's heart packed his cold skin, the sour smell clinging to him, holding a part of him. He reached the bus stop, his shaking hands checking the timetable. But the next bus wasn't coming for hours. He sat on the bench, the sun striking its hard but empty light, casting no shadow beneath him. The locals passed, their faces blank but their eyes piercing, watching him, waiting. He felt it again, not at his feet, but in his chest, as if something was settling in, taking comfort. The whispers were gone, but the silence was worse, heavy and final, like a door closing forever. The bus arrived at dusk, its headlights piercing the fading light, but Jack didn't get on. He stood, his backpack at his feet, his eyes fixed on the city, on the people who now seemed close to him. The chauffeur called to him, but Jack did not answer, his body moving of itself, turning to Griffield, to the streets where the shadows waited. He walked, his steps silent, his heart calm, the smells sour, keeping a part of him as natural as his breath. That night the shadows returned, gliding through the streets, their greens wide, their eyes bright, but Jack did not run. He stood among them, his shadow gone, his body light, his soul bound to her. The villagers watched from their windows, their pale face, their complicit eyes, welcoming him as one of their own. The shadows did not chase him away, they embraced him with their soft whisper, now a lullaby of darkness that put him to sleep. The sun rose over Griffield, its light hard and merciless, casting no shadows on the cracked sidewalk. A new passenger stepped off the bus, a camera around his neck, his eyes curious, unconscious. The premises were busy, their blank faces, their silent steps, their shadowless bodies under the relentless sun. He did not speak of the newcomer, did not warn him, but their eyes followed, waiting, knowing. Tonight the shadows will rise again, smiling at their sharp, hungry teeth. And when the newcomer lifts his camera, when he sees what lies behind Griffield's faces, will he run, or will he stand in the dark, his shadow looming, his soul claimed by a city that never lets go? Some places steal more than your shadow, they steal your soul in Griffield. The sun shines but the darkness waits. If you see the shadows moving, if you hear the whispers calling your name, don't look back, don't stay. For some nights when the streets are quiet and the light is gone, the shadows come for you. Will you let them get you?